Hi, my name's Georgia, and last winter my parents shoved my grandmother, 81 years old, out into a snowstorm. They gave her two crumpled dollars. No coat, no goodbye, just the front door slamming behind her like she never existed. They told me to stay quiet, to let it go. But what if I told you that wasn't the first time they erased someone in our family? What if I told you they'd been stealing from her long before that night? And what if the woman they tried to discard ended up with $900,000 and the kind of dignity they couldn't buy back? Would you want to know how we turned their silence into our story? I could hear the hum of the furnace trying to fight back the cold before it even reached my room. The winds had picked up about an hour ago, pushing against the old siding of our house like they were trying to get in. I sat cross-legged on my bed, pretending to read the same sentence for the third time, but my eyes kept drifting to the crack beneath the door and the faint sounds of voices downstairs. My mother's tone was sharper than usual. That meant something. Vera didn't raise her voice unless she was irritated enough that someone would remember it. My father, Hollis, spoke less, but when he did, it was always in that careful, emotionless tone that said, "This is already decided." I shouldn't have been listening, I know. My role in this house was clear. Be quiet, be polite, don't interfere, especially when it came to adult matters. But something about the edge in Vera's voice made me slide off my bed and step lightly into the hallway, just close enough to hear without being seen. "Inez," my mother said, "we've done what we can, but you've made it clear you're not trying to be part of this household." That stopped me cold, Grandma. "I'm not causing trouble," I heard my grandmother's soft voice. She never raised it, not even when she was being dismissed. "You take up space," Vera snapped. "You forget things. You make the kids anxious. Frankly, you're a liability now. You're leaving tonight." There was a pause, then my father's voice, quiet, firm. "We've given you $2. That's enough for the bus downtown. There's a shelter. Be grateful." I stood there, frozen, stomach lurching. What shelter? It was 23 degrees outside. The snow hadn't even started yet, but the storm was coming. Everyone knew that. A blizzard warning had been on the news all afternoon. "Please," Inez whispered. "It's dark. I don't have a coat." "You should have thought about that when you kept interfering with the boys' routines," Vera shot back. "You brought this on yourself." I crept down a few more steps, just in time to see the door to the hallway swing open. My grandmother stood there, her small frame swallowed up by the shadows of the entryway. She had her old suitcase, the one with a frayed handle and one wheel that didn't roll. She wore only a cardigan. Her good coat wasn't in sight, and they didn't even offer it to her. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice or plead or beg. She looked back once, briefly, right toward me. I ducked down instinctively behind the banister. I don't know why. Shame, maybe. Then the door opened, and with one gust of icy wind, she stepped out. Hollis closed it behind her. Just like that. I stayed there, heart pounding, staring at the door like it might open again, like someone might realize what had just happened and take it back. Instead, I heard Vera's voice behind me, calm, unbothered. "You'll stay out of this, Georgia. You're not helping." I turned slowly. She stood at the top of the stairs, arms folded, eyes hard. She didn't yell. She didn't scold. She just told me as if it were obvious. "She left with nothing," I said, voice cracking. "She made her choices," my mother replied, and walked away like it was a conversation about leftovers in the fridge. I went to the front window, pulling the curtain back just a little. Snow had started falling, soft at first, like powdered sugar. Grandma was already halfway down the street, suitcase bumping unevenly behind her. Her shoulders were hunched. She looked so small. I should have screamed. I should have run after her. I should have said something, anything, but I didn't. I stood there, holding the curtain with numb fingers, watching the woman who had held my hand through fevers and told me stories about her childhood in Missouri disappear into the dark with $2 and no coat. And that silence, between me and my parents, between what I knew and what I couldn't undo, was heavier than any storm. The snow hadn't stopped. Not really. It had slowed to a whisper against the windows, but the weight of it still pressed against the world outside. That morning, I sat on the edge of my bed, the covers tangled around my legs, staring at nothing in particular. I hadn't slept, not really. I'd drifted in and out, haunted by the image of Grandma's small figure fading into the darkness, with only her suitcase and a brittle silence trailing behind her. Downstairs, I heard the clink of coffee mugs and the muted thump of the refrigerator door. The smell of toast drifted up the stairs like nothing had happened. Like the night before had been any other evening, as if we hadn't shoved someone we loved, or claimed to, into a blizzard with pocket change and no protection. I made my way down, feet heavy, shoulders stiff. In the kitchen, Vera was seated at the breakfast bar, calmly flipping through a real estate magazine. Hollis was at the sink, rinsing a plate. The news played low on the TV in the corner, talking about road closures and emergency shelters opening due to the cold snap. "Morning," Hollis offered without turning around. Vera looked up just long enough to register my presence. "Coffee's fresh, toast's on the counter." I poured a cup out of habit, not really tasting it, and leaned against the counter. "She didn't take her coat," I said finally. Vera didn't look up. "She had a sweater. It's 20 degrees. She sighed like I was bringing up the weather too loudly. "Georgia, don't start. We gave her options. She made her choices." I held her stare, but she'd already gone back to a photo of a house with granite countertops. "She's better off," she added, like it was some sort of mantra. "She'll be fine." I didn't answer. I set my cup down, walked out of the kitchen, and made my way to the hallway closet. I told myself I was just getting my coat, just that. But my hands moved before I could stop them, pushing past old scarves and a wrinkled raincoat until they landed on something soft, familiar. It was still there, Grandma's coat, the one with the knitted collar she used to bury her chin into on windy days. The same coat she'd worn to every one of my school plays, the one that still smelled faintly like lavender and cold cream. She hadn't even taken it with her. That alone made my throat tighten, but it was what I found next that stopped me entirely. Inside the pocket, folded 3 times, was a slip of paper, a bank transaction receipt. The date was from 6 months earlier. The withdrawal was for a little over $16,000, and the name at the bottom wasn't Grandma's, it was Vera's, but there was no co-signature, no authorization, nothing showing that Grandma had approved or even known about it. I stared at it, the numbers blurring. My fingers tingled, whether from the cold or from something else I couldn't name. Shock, maybe. Rage, the slow, thick kind that starts in your stomach and crawls up your spine. Because this wasn't just about tossing someone out. It wasn't just callousness or detachment. This was control. This was erasure. This was theft. And it wasn't the first time. My mind pulled back to a memory I had no interest in reliving, but it came anyway. Grandma's 80th birthday. We'd planned something small, just dinner at home, maybe a cake. But the night before, Vera had pulled me aside, annoyed. "Cancel it," she'd said. "It's not worth the fuss. We've got Isolde's party next week." So we canceled. And the following weekend, Isolde had a blowout birthday bash, $8,000, easily, catered hors d'oeuvres, live music, a designer cake tall enough to feed a wedding. Guests from out of state. Instagrammable moments arranged like decor. I'd watched Grandma clap politely through the slideshow of Isolde's life. She'd even helped clean up after. But later, I'd found her in the kitchen, quietly wiping her eyes with a napkin, muttering something about her knees and needing a minute. I hadn't said anything then. But now, standing in front of that coat, paper crinkling between my fingers, I realized I had kept quiet one time too many. "She didn't even take this," I whispered. Not out of forgetfulness. No, she'd left it behind because deep down, I think she knew there was no room in that house for her warmth anymore. And suddenly, something inside me, something quiet and careful, snapped, not loudly. It was the soft kind of fracture, the kind that doesn't scream but shifts your entire foundation. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a pattern, a slow erosion of dignity, dressed up as order and good intentions. A rewriting of history with smiles and firm handshakes. No more. I folded the receipt carefully, slid it into my jeans pocket, and grabbed Grandma's coat. If no one else was going to speak up for her, I would. The wind pushed against the glass like it had something to prove. I stood outside the clinic, my fingers tingling from the cold that had seeped into my gloves. I'd just stepped out after speaking to the receptionist. Yes, I'd like to report potential power of attorney abuse. And now I wasn't sure where to go next. The storm had passed, but the air was still sharp. The roads had been cleared enough to drive, but patches of snow lingered in parking lots and sidewalk corners like memories that didn't know when to leave. I looked down the street, unsure if I should head home or back to the apartment where Grandma now stayed, a temporary space loaned by a charity-run center for seniors. I needed to see her again. 2 buses and a 15-minute walk later, I found myself at the clinic. The building wasn't much, just a beige rectangle with too many flickering lights and a front door that wheezed when it closed. Inside, it smelled like rubbing alcohol and faint sadness. The waiting room was full, patients slumped in plastic chairs under posters about pneumonia and diabetes. I approached the check-in counter carefully, heart tight in my chest. "Hi," I said quietly. "I'm looking for Inez Varela. She was brought in during the storm." The nurse glanced at her screen, then back at me. "And you are?" "I'm her granddaughter." Her gaze softened a little. "She's stable now. Mild hypothermia. She didn't bring any ID, but she gave your name, room 6, down that hallway." When I stepped inside, the room was dim and quiet. Grandma lay beneath a thin blanket, her gray hair slightly damp at the edges. Her hands, once always warm when they cupped my cheeks, were tucked beneath the covers, unmoving. "Grandma?" I whispered. Her eyes fluttered open. "Georgia," she said, voice barely there. "I told them not to call anyone. Didn't want to be a bother." I sat beside her, reaching for her hand. It was so cold, I flinched. "You're not a bother. You're my family," she smiled weakly. "Not to everyone." A silence hung between us, not empty, but full of everything we weren't saying. She turned her head slowly. It was snowing bad. But I kept thinking, "Don't cry, Inez. Don't give them the satisfaction." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just squeezed her hand gently, grounding myself in her presence. Sitting there, I remembered something I hadn't wanted to. Months ago, during a family dinner, Vera had been talking about finances. The topic had drifted from taxes to retirement to the burden of the older generation. And then, laughing over a glass of white wine, she'd said, right in front of the grandkids, "Honestly, who even needs an old woman anymore unless it's for her checks?" Some of the others laughed. Isolde smirked. Dad didn't even blink. And Grandma just looked down at her plate and nodded slightly, as if she agreed, as if agreeing would make it hurt less. But I had seen her eyes. She never said a word that night, just cleared dishes like always. She probably folded the napkins before bed. That was her, graceful in silence, even when bruised by words. Now, in that small clinic room, watching her breathe through cracked lips, I knew I had to act. When I left, it was early evening. The sky was starting to dim, and the cold crept back under my collar. I sat on a bench outside, staring at the traffic light blinking red across the intersection. My fingers tightened around the folded receipt in my coat pocket. I didn't want revenge. This wasn't about spite or ego. It was about justice. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app, wrote down what I'd seen in the closet, what I'd found in the pocket, the date, the amount, Vera's signature. Then I called the number the clinic receptionist had quietly given me earlier. "State Financial Abuse Reporting Line," the voice on the line said. I took a breath. "Yes," I said, my voice low but certain. "I believe my grandmother is a victim of unauthorized financial control." The call ended 10 minutes later, and I felt like I had stepped off a cliff, but in the right direction. As I made my way to the bus stop, snow flurries started again. Lighter this time, no longer a threat, just a quiet reminder of everything we'd just survived. I didn't go straight home after leaving the clinic that night. I stopped by a coffee shop near the edge of town, one of those small, quiet places that still had booths with cracked vinyl and old jazz on the speakers. I needed time to think. I needed somewhere other than that house, even just for an hour. By the time I did walk through the front door, the lights were dimmed and the dishwasher hummed in the background. Everything looked normal, like the past 72 hours hadn't happened. I dropped my coat over the back of a chair, slipped off my boots, and moved toward the kitchen. The familiar clink of forks on plates told me dinner hadn't ended too long ago. They were there, Vera and Hollis, seated at the dining table, each with a half-finished glass of red wine. The dishes had already been cleared. The table was too clean. They looked up when I entered, but only for a moment, as if I'd interrupted a commercial. I pulled out a chair and sat down across from them. Vera folded her arms. "Long day?" I didn't answer. I pulled a folded sheet of paper from my coat pocket and placed it on the table, sliding it toward her. She raised an eyebrow and slowly unfolded it. Her eyes scanned the page. Hollis leaned in. "What's this?" I spoke evenly, but my voice still trembled. "That's the clinic's intake form. Inez was admitted 2 nights ago with hypothermia. No ID. No coat. Alone." Hollis's expression didn't change, but Vera's jaw tightened. "You left her in a snowstorm," I continued. "She could have died." Vera set the paper down and exhaled sharply. "Georgia, that's dramatic. You don't know what stress we've been under." "Stress?" I repeated. "We had to make a choice," Hollis interjected. "It wasn't easy, but we made the responsible one." "No," I said, voice firmer now. "You made the selfish one." The silence that followed was thick and slow, like walking through molasses. Then Vera leaned back in her chair and gave a cold, practiced smile. "She's fine now, isn't she?" I stared at her. "She's alive. That's more than some get." There it was, the mask slipping. Just a little. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something, to make them see what they had done. But instead, I stood up and walked to the garage door. I opened it, flicked on the light, and pointed. The boxes were still there, stacked neatly along the far wall. I'd noticed them the night Inez left, but hadn't questioned it. "What is that?" I asked. Vera appeared behind me, arms crossed. "Spring cleaning." I walked over and opened the top box. Inside were photo albums, one from a trip to Yellowstone, one from her 50th anniversary with Grandpa Henry. A framed picture of him smiling in his work overalls, paint-stained fingers gripping Inez's shoulder, knitting yarn, her favorite ceramic mug wrapped in newspaper. "You packed her things before you told her to leave," I said, turning around. "Did she even get a chance to say no?" "She didn't need to," Vera replied, voice tight. "She knew. She's not dumb." "She's not trash," I said. The housekeeper, Maria, had stepped into the doorway quietly, a dish towel still in hand. Her eyes flicked to the boxes, then to me. I could see it in her face. She knew. She'd been told not to say anything. "Maria," I said softly, "did Mom ask you to pack these?" Maria hesitated. Then she nodded once and stepped back into the kitchen. I followed Vera back inside. The silence followed me. "If you do this again," I said finally, "if you push her 1 inch further, I won't stay quiet. I will go public. I'll make sure every neighbor, every friend, every church committee you pretend to care about knows what you did." Vera's face froze. Hollis stood slowly, like he was unsure if he should interrupt. And then Isolde walked in through the side door, flipping her hair back and setting her purse on the counter like it was just any evening. "What's going on?" she asked casually. No one answered. She looked between us, then rolled her eyes. "Oh, is this about Grandma again?" she said. "You're still hung up on that?" I didn't move. "She's fine, right?" Isolde continued. "She's always been good at making things dramatic. That's how people like her get attention. And you," she looked at me, "are just feeding into it." I turned to her. "Feeding into it?" "Yeah," she said. "This crusade of yours, it's going to rip this family apart. For what? An old woman who can't even remember what she said yesterday?" I felt something rise in me then. Not anger, not yet, but something heavier. a resignation that still had fight in it. "You'll break the family for that old woman?" Isolde asked, almost scoffing. I didn't blink. "No," I said, voice steady. "You already did." I waited until Thursday night. Vera and Hollis had left for a dinner party, something related to Hollis's work, a client from Omaha or Chicago. I didn't really care. Isolde was at some gallery opening, no doubt sipping champagne and pretending to understand postmodern sculpture. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I walked down the hall and paused outside my father's office. The door was closed, as usual. I turned the knob. Unlocked. I stepped inside and gently pulled the door shut behind me. The smell in the room, aged leather, printer ink, and faint cologne, wrapped around me like something that had long stopped welcoming. I knew exactly what I was looking for. There was a tall cherrywood filing cabinet tucked behind his desk. I'd seen him open it a dozen times with a silver key he kept in a hollowed-out book on his shelf. I found it in seconds. The key slid in with a soft click. The third drawer down had what I needed. It was labeled, in my father's neat handwriting, POA, Inez V. I stared at that label for a moment, bile rising. Inside were papers, some typed, some handwritten, and then a thin folder labeled Disbursements. I flipped it open. The first page was a transaction slip. Withdrawal, $16,400. Authorized by Vera Elston. There was a signature, hers, but nothing else. No initials from Grandma, no secondary approval, no mention of a legal representative. I flipped through more. Recurring withdrawals, smaller amounts, but frequent, most within weeks of Inez's hospitalization last summer. That was when she'd been foggy, groggy from her fall and the medication. That was when Vera said she'd take care of the paperwork. And she had, for herself. I stood there in the office for a long time, just staring at it all. Then I took out my phone and snapped a few photos, just in case. I returned everything exactly as I found it, relocked the drawer, and placed the key back in its hollowed home. The next morning, I texted Arden Liu, my cousin. She was finishing law school out in Minneapolis and had always been the one in the family who asked the questions nobody else dared. We met at a public library near her parents' place over the weekend. She brought coffee. I brought copies of the documents. She flipped through them silently, lips tightening. "Georgia," she said finally, "this power of attorney form is dated 2 weeks after Inez's second ER visit." I nodded. That's when she was still on pain meds. She wasn't even making full sentences. Arden leaned back. Then she wasn't legally competent to sign this. And there's no witness, no notary. This could be criminal. I swallowed. I thought so. She'd need to be evaluated to verify capacity, and that clearly didn't happen. We sat in silence for a moment, sipping our drinks while the world bustled quietly around us, college students typing, an old man snoring into a newspaper. Arden glanced at me. "Do you want to file?" I hesitated. "Not yet. I want to understand all of it first." She nodded. That afternoon, I went to see Grandma. Her temporary apartment wasn't fancy, but it was warm and safe. A caseworker had helped place her there, and she seemed more at peace than I'd seen her in months. We sat on the little love seat, sharing some peppermint tea. She adjusted her scarf and looked out the window. "I miss my old doctor," she said suddenly. I looked over. "Dr. Simmons?" She nodded. He understood my knees, knew exactly where it hurt without me having to say much. Then one day, they told me he wasn't coming anymore. "Did they say why?" She shook her head. "Just said I didn't need it anymore. Said it was too expensive." Later, I called the clinic. The receptionist was kind but guarded. "Yes," she said slowly. "Dr. Simmons used to do monthly visits. But your mother called to cancel services last fall, said they were redundant, not medically necessary." I hung up quietly. I sat on the bus ride home with a strange ache in my chest. There was something cruel about taking away care from someone who never asked for much, about dressing it up as efficiency or financial wisdom. That night, I sat at my desk with the folder and started drafting an email. Subject line, "Elder Financial Misuse. Elston family case. I got halfway through. Then I stopped. Not because I doubted myself, but because I realized I wanted more than a report. I wanted truth. Documented. Visible. I printed out every form, every screenshot. I placed them neatly in a manila envelope. Then I opened my laptop and typed in a name I'd followed quietly for months. Felix Gannon. Financial journalist, known for his exposés on small-town corruption and family embezzlement. He wrote like a man who didn't blink. I sealed the envelope and slid it into my coat. The next morning, I walked to the post office and handed it over the counter. Certified mail. Signature required. I wasn't just uncovering their lies. I was rewriting our legacy. After I dropped the envelope at the post office, I didn't head straight home. Inez was waiting for me at the diner on Hawthorne Avenue, the one with the squeaky booths and chipped mugs, where you could sit unnoticed for hours and no one would rush you. I found her at our usual booth by the window, nursing a lukewarm cup of tea, wearing that same soft pink sweater she always claimed was older than me. She looked up when I slid in across from her. I didn't say anything at first. Neither did she. Then she smiled, that tired but knowing way only older women do. "You look like someone who just made a big decision." I chuckled under my breath. "You could say that." She patted the table gently. "We won't fight them, Georgia. We'll outlive them, with dignity." Inez had always believed in quiet resistance, not out of weakness, but out of principle. She once told me, "Making noise is easy, living well in spite of them. That's the revolution." We finished our tea. I paid as usual, even though she always tried to argue. Then we walked together, slowly, her arm tucked in mine, to the credit union a few blocks away. Inside, we met with a woman named Reba. She wore tortoiseshell glasses and had a voice like she'd been singing in choirs since the 80s. Reba helped us set up a joint savings account, only in my name, but for Inez's security. Inez didn't want anything that could be touched again by Vera or Hollis. When Reba asked where the funds were coming from, I just said, "Personal," and smiled. That was enough. On the way back to Inez's apartment, we stopped at a convenience store to buy ginger snaps and paper towels. At the checkout counter, Inez picked up a $5 scratch-off ticket from the rotating stand near the register. "Let's pretend luck still works," she said, slipping it onto the counter. The clerk laughed. "Sometimes pretending's enough." We didn't scratch it right away. We walked home, made tea again, put on some music, old standards, the kind she liked, and only then did we sit down at the table with a penny and the ticket between us. It was a small win, $20, enough for more tea, more ginger snaps. We both laughed like kids, and for a few minutes, the world was simple. The next week, we bought another ticket. Not out of desperation, out of ritual. We didn't expect anything. Then, on a Tuesday morning when frost still dusted the grass, Inez sent me to the store for milk. I bought the ticket almost as an afterthought. I came home, dropped the groceries, and scratched it while waiting for the kettle to boil. 3 rows of numbers. I didn't notice it at first. I was halfway through texting Arden when I glanced again and felt the breath leave my lungs. 9, 0, 0, comma, 0, 0, 0. I checked it twice, then 3 more times. I took a photo, zoomed in, held it under the lamp. I had to sit down. Inez came in from the hallway, rubbing her elbow. "Did the kettle scream yet?" I handed her the ticket wordlessly. She looked at it, then at me. "What am I looking at?" "We won," I whispered. She blinked. "How much?" "Almost $1 million." She sat down slowly, the ticket still between her fingers. "Well," she said softly, "I'll be damned." We didn't jump or scream or even smile. Not right away. We just sat there, surrounded by the sound of the kettle boiling and a kind of stunned silence that wrapped around us like a quilt. Later that afternoon, after the claim was verified, after the paperwork was started, after the bank manager shook my hand 3 times too firmly, we went home and sat again. No one else knew. No one would, not yet. "Keep it quiet," Inez said. Let them think we're still the ones they tried to forget. And I agreed. I called Arden, explained what happened, and asked for her help setting up a nonprofit. We named it the Varela Dignity Fund. Its mission: to provide emergency aid to seniors pushed out by their own families. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Arden handled the paperwork with a precision that reminded me why she'd always been the sharpest in the family. We kept Inez's name off every official document, only referencing her as the fund's inspiration. Publicly, she was a ghost. Privately, she was the architect. The fund's bank account was opened, Inez's apartment lease was extended, her doctor reinstated, and I went back to smiling politely at family dinners and nodding through Vera's monologues about self-made success. But things had shifted. Vera started to notice. One evening, she caught me humming in the hallway. "You seem unusually cheerful these days," she said, pouring herself a glass of wine. "Maybe I'm just getting better at keeping things in perspective," I replied, watching her carefully. She narrowed her eyes. "You know, people who act too happy are usually hiding something." I smiled. "Then I guess I've got a lot to hide." That night, back in my room, I opened my laptop and checked my email. There it was. From Felix Gannon. Subject: "Let's meet." And just like that, I knew. They thought silence was surrender. They didn't know silence could be strategy. The meeting was set for Saturday afternoon, just 2 days before the gala. Vera framed it as a family regrouping over dinner, her favorite way of masking landmines with linen napkins. She even made her rosemary chicken, the one she used to pull out whenever she needed the illusion of warmth. I showed up wearing the most neutral expression I could summon, but my spine was coiled tight. I knew better by now. Vera didn't do reconciliation. She did containment. And that night, I was the leak. The table was already set when I walked in. Hollis sat at the head, eyes buried in his phone. Isolde leaned against the counter, swirling wine in her glass like a game show host about to read the wrong answer. "Glad you could make it," Vera said as she emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. Her tone was smooth, but her eyes sharpened the moment they met mine. I sat down and folded my hands. Vera took her seat across from me. "Let's begin." There was no small talk, no grace. "Georgia," Isolde started, voice thick with fake pity. "We know it was you who called the state. Mom found out. You don't have to keep denying it." I didn't blink. "She has friends in the agency," Isolde went on. "They talk. We know." Vera nodded solemnly, as if delivering news of a funeral. "We're disappointed. Deeply." Hollis said nothing. I reached into my bag and pulled out the small voice recorder Inez had given me 3 weeks prior. The one she'd used to record conversations around the house when she started feeling unsafe. She'd been unsure if it would matter. But now, it was everything. I placed it gently on the table, clicked play, and leaned back. The recording crackled for a second, then came the unmistakable sound of Isolde's voice. "Just blame the little one. She's always invisible anyway. No one will question it if we throw her under the bus." Vera's voice followed. "Smart. Quick and clean." Silence fell over the room like someone had cut the power. Hollis stared at the table. Vera's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Isolde went pale, her wineglass frozen mid-air. I reached forward and clicked stop. "You framed me," I said. "And you almost got away with it." Isolde finally found her voice. "That was taken out of context." I laughed. "There's no context where that sentence means anything else." Vera tried to recover. "That recording is illegal. She had no right." "She had every right," I said. "You all made her feel like a squatter in her own daughter's house. She protected herself the only way she could." No one responded. The rosemary chicken sat untouched. I stood and grabbed my bag. "You want to control the narrative," I said. "But this one belongs to her now. And me." I walked out, letting the front door close behind me without slamming it. Some silences deserve precision. Later that night, I went to see Inez. The sky was clear, stars sharp as glass. Her apartment smelled like lavender oil, and the apple crisp she always reheated too long. She handed me a worn photo album wrapped in a floral dish towel. "I meant to give this to you sooner," she said. I opened it and felt my chest tighten. Photos of her as a teenager, smiling wide on a porch swing. Pictures of her and Grandpa Henry dancing in the backyard, arms wrapped tight. Baby pictures of me, one where I'm gripping her thumb like it's the only thing keeping me upright. "I found it in the bottom of a linen drawer," she said softly. "Your mother hid it," said memories confuse the kids. I turned each page slowly, my fingers tracing the edges of decades. "She didn't want us remembering," I said. "She didn't want you understanding," Inez replied. We sat quietly, flipping pages under the glow of a lamp. Outside, wind brushed softly against the windows, like even the world was pausing to listen. When I got home, I didn't bother going to my room. I sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and found the draft I'd been editing for weeks. A full account. The money taken, the canceled medical care, the eviction, the lies. I added one line to the top. "My name is Georgia Talora, and I'm ready to speak on record." Then I emailed it to Felix Gannon. If they feared the truth, I'd let them drown in it. The night of the gala, the air had that sharpness that only late February in Iowa could bring. Wind tugged at the hem of my coat as I helped Inez out of the cab, her gloved hand gripping my forearm for balance. She wore her softest navy shawl, a simple string of pearls around her neck, and that quiet expression she always carried when life turned loud around her. City Hall glowed gold in the evening light, banners fluttering from the second-floor windows. Inside, warmth met us in waves, people in evening attire, waiters with trays of sparkling cider, and a local jazz quartet playing something gentle enough to fill the gaps between conversation. Inez looked around slowly. "Are you sure we belong here?" she whispered. "You more than anyone," I said, guiding her toward the check-in table. She was listed under Special Honoree. A volunteer handed her a name badge and gently led us to our seats near the front. Inez kept her eyes on the carpet. She wasn't one for the spotlight, but tonight she wouldn't be hiding behind anyone. 15 minutes later, the room quieted as Felix Gannon took the podium. He wore a tailored blazer and no tie, his voice deep and steady, like a man who didn't have to raise it to be heard. "Tonight," he said, "we recognize quiet courage, the kind that doesn't make headlines until someone decides it must." He paused. "There is a foundation in this city, one that now serves abandoned elders across 5 counties. Its inspiration was anonymous. Until now." I held Inez's hand tightly as I stood and made my way toward the stage. I didn't need a speech. I didn't need permission. I adjusted the microphone, cleared my throat, and began. "My name is Georgia Talora," I said. "I'm not the founder of the Varela Dignity Fund. I'm just the granddaughter of a woman this town, and her own family, tried to forget." Gasps whispered through the crowd. I continued. "This woman was thrown out of her home, into a blizzard, with $2 in her hand and no coat on her back. She had given everything, her money, her years, her care, to a family who decided she no longer fit their image, and when she was left cold and alone, they expected her to fade away quietly." I paused, scanning the faces before me. Some looked down, others leaned in. But she didn't fade. She fought, silently, with grace. And now, because of her, hundreds of seniors across Iowa are no longer invisible. Then I clicked the remote. Behind me, a screen lit up. Bank withdrawals, power of attorney forms, a clinic's intake note stating hypothermia due to exposure. Murmurs turned into low voices, sharp whispers. The room changed. Felix stepped forward and spoke into his microphone. "A formal inquiry has been submitted to the State Financial Crimes Bureau. This isn't just a story, it's evidence." Someone in the back stood up. A woman near the mayor gasped. My father, seated with Vera 3 rows behind me, shifted uncomfortably. Vera stared straight ahead, her face taut like a mask that finally cracked. She didn't speak. She didn't blink. She just gripped the armrest until her knuckles turned white. Hollis looked toward the exit. Isolde was nowhere to be seen. I left the stage without waiting for applause. Inez met me halfway, her eyes glistening. "I thought I'd be embarrassed," she whispered, "but I feel lighter." "You earned every word," I told her. The applause came then, slowly at first, then rising like a wave. It wasn't for me, it was for her. We stood there, not just as granddaughter and grandmother, but as women who refused to be erased. When the event ended and the last of the handshakes faded, a man approached me. He looked about 60, with a soft gray beard and eyes that carried more sadness than anger. "My mother went through something similar," he said. "But I didn't speak up in time. You didn't just honor her, you honored all of us." Inez smiled gently. "It's never too late to start remembering people." We stepped back outside. The cold hadn't changed, but something in the air felt different, lighter, fairer. Justice had come, not in a courtroom or a headline, but in a room full of witnesses who could no longer pretend they didn't know. And though it felt good, I knew something else too. But even justice leaves a bruise. Not all wounds close at once. 2 weeks after the gala, the air in my apartment still held the echoes of everything that had just happened. The newspapers had moved on. The neighbors no longer whispered when I passed them in the grocery store. The letters had stopped arriving, and the voicemail from Arden, a kind, proud message telling me that the State Bureau had opened formal proceedings, was the only thing I'd saved. It was a gray morning, the kind that didn't make promises. I stood by the window, watching the bare branches outside sway with the breeze. Life, at least on the outside, had returned to its routine. But inside me, something was still settling. There were days I felt weightless, freed, and others when I still heard Vera's voice in my head, that clipped tone wrapped in sugar. "You always did take things too personally, Georgia." Or his old sneer, "You'll regret tearing this family apart for one old woman." But I never did. That morning, I brewed tea, opened my laptop, and declined another interview request, this one from a national radio program. I didn't need a spotlight. The story had already been told. The work we were doing now, growing the fund, helping more seniors, spoke louder than anything I could say on a podcast. Around 10, Inez called. "Come by later," she said. "I have something for you." I walked to her place just before noon. The sky was trying to brighten, but winter wasn't done yet. Her porch was swept clean, the rocking chair out again. She sat there wrapped in a quilt, a mug of chamomile in one hand. "You're early," she smiled. "You're always early," I said, sitting beside her. She handed me a small wooden box, its hinges slightly rusted. I recognized it. It had once sat on her nightstand back in the old house. I hadn't seen it since she left. "Open it," she said gently. Inside was a photograph, one I hadn't seen in years. I was maybe 4, curled up asleep on her lap, a stuffed bear slipping from my arms. Her hand rested protectively on my back, and her eyes, captured in the faded color of the photo, were looking down at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. Beneath it, folded carefully, was a handwritten note. "If you hadn't seen me," it read, "no one would have remembered I existed. You made me matter again." I looked up. She was staring out across the yard, not meeting my eyes. "Why'd you keep this?" I asked quietly. "Because," she said, her voice steady, "someday I knew I'd need to remind you that love isn't loud. Sometimes it's just presence. You showed up. That saved me." We sat there a while longer, not speaking. The silence between us was nothing like the silences I'd grown up with. This one held warmth. Later that week, I moved the photo to my nightstand. I turned down another interview. Felix Gannon had emailed to say the full feature would run Sunday. I didn't open it. Instead, I spent my energy launching the next phase of the Varela Dignity Fund. We were expanding to 4 new cities. Arden handled the legal side. Inez wrote handwritten notes to the first 10 recipients of aid, each one folded in blue envelopes, stamped carefully, like it was something sacred. Every step felt like reclamation. A few days later, I found myself walking past the house I'd grown up in. I hadn't meant to. It just happened. Errands rerouted. Traffic backed up, and suddenly I was on Sycamore Lane again. The shutters were still that same pale blue. The porch looked smaller than I remembered. And the swing where Inez used to rock me during summer nights, it was gone. I stopped on the sidewalk. I didn't move closer. I didn't need to. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel longing. What I felt was clarity. That house held so many ghosts, of shame, of silence, of looking away. I had carried its walls on my back long after I walked out of it. Not anymore. I left more than a house, I whispered to no one. I left a history I refused to keep reliving. I turned and walked away, the wind soft against my face. At home that evening, I poured myself a glass of water, turned off my phone, and sat by the window again. Justice may feel like a final word. But sometimes, it's just the start of speaking your truth. Sometimes, the most powerful way to fight back isn't with anger, but with truth. This story wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, memory, and standing up for someone when everyone else turned away. Have you ever had to choose between your family and what's right? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that remind us all of the quiet strength inside us.